first meeting with Peter was we were right in the same track as to what we wanted this thing to look like. He told me he wanted to believe that you could get on a plane and fly to Middle Earth and go to Cirith Ungol and there's the stairs, and so I was constantly trying to bring that absolute realism into it, even though both were very stylized. I mean, you look at the Star Wars films, and it has the very sort of metropolis-looking buildings and architecture. Lord of the Rings had its own set of stylized buildings also, but they were somewhat grounded in reality. And so, it's hard to really pull off something that's somebody's never... For instance, you look at Blade Runner. Blade Runner was very stylized, yet it had that dirtiness to it, and that grittiness that exists everywhere. It's sort of a weird thing, because it's not like, obviously there's dust flying around in the air, but it's something that you can't see, but if it's not there, you notice it. And so we're, on Lord of the Rings, we would completely light the shot, get it completely done, and then I just put the slightest bit of fogging over the frame, just to, a very light mist always floating over everything, just to give it a little, it just sets it back into the real space a bit more. Each aspect of Lord of the Rings had its own problems, and it's not that any one was particularly hard, but we just had so many of them. Each, we had 10 problems a month instead of one problem a month, and so that's what made it the most difficult to me. And another thing that's very difficult is defining what you want this look to be. And so that's a matter of, working with the art department and obviously Peter, and sort of, Peter has a vision of what he wants Middle-earth to look like, what he wants Gollum to look like, and it's sort of mining his brain to figure out, to get his vision onto film through drawings and sketches and tests that we've done. We have many tests to show him and get approval of, because you can go different ways. And you can say, I want Gollum to jump up on a rock and look happy. I could do that 5 million different ways. And so it's finding out his one particular way. And once we sort of found it, it became pretty easy to sort of, know where he was going with that. But that most difficult part is actually finding it. The number of people that were working under me on Return of the King in particular, indirectly, were probably around 800. And that includes about 450 at Weta Digital. So creating all the, Gollum and all the digital creatures and putting all the elements together. There was another 200 that was at the miniatures department, which was also headed by Alex Funke, but we were all sort of, getting information from them and bringing it into our department. And then I had a couple shooting units where I had about 200 extras and things. So it was this, it's a whole group of people that were sort of working towards the end. It's definitely better if people are interested in the project that they're working on, and I think that really shows on the screen. I think if we got a bunch of people that just were in there to pay their bills, you wouldn't have that ambition to make it look. I remember vividly on some of our meetings that we would have with the artists, and I look at a shot and I go, well, that's pretty good. That should be all right for the film, and I think it'll work fine. And they just wanted to go back and fix some things. They just had it in themselves to go back. I really want to fix this one thing because Gollum has a little thing on his hair, and nobody else in the world would ever see it, but to them it meant something, and so they could look at it with pride and say it's perfect. So it definitely helps. Star Wars came out in 1977, 78, somewhere around there. So around 77, 78, I was going to art school. I just started art school, and I guess I had more of an art aesthetic to things, and as being in art school and being in college, I had a little more sort of radical side to me. So my favorite films at that time period were things like Mad Max. I really loved Mad Max. I saw it probably 26 times, and then Road Warrior, and that sort of grittier future than what, you know, Star Wars, the science fiction future. Now, the thing that I would say got me most interested in filmmaking was 2001. And I think I saw that like in 8th grade, and I just, again, another film that I saw probably 20 times over and over again. And it was just so beautiful the way Stanley Kubrick made space part of our everyday life. It wasn't really a fantasy where you're going up and shooting laser beams. I mean, you know, there was Howard Johnson's hotels in space, and you took, at that time, Pan Am to get there, and so all the things that we had in everyday life, that was part of space, which is probably the way it's going to end up going, you know. So to me, that was more intriguing than the fantasy side of things. Although I realized Star Wars was pretty monumental in the whole filmmaking world. I'm not necessarily drawn to science fiction films. I tend to do an array of films, and I find my work and what I do sort of like going to school. I get completely immersed in no matter what it is. So I'm not like following a genre of film, and to me it makes it a little more interesting. I graduated with a master's in fine arts, painting and drawing, and so I never really planned to get into filmmaking. It sort of was a backdoored route where I was interested in art. At the time, home computers were just coming into, you know, the public. IBM was just announcing their first thing, and I actually got into computer animation because I was frightened by it, frightened by computers. I was frightened that in such a way that at that time the media was telling us how computers were going to take over our lives, and literally they were saying within 5 years we were going to, you know, have implants in our brains, and that these computers were going to be controlling us. And so people were really freaked out about this, and, you know, jobs were going to be misplaced, and, you know, everybody, and basically it was going to be this one computer sitting there ruling the world, is the way they made it sound, as all good media does, you know. And so I actually bought my first Radio Shack computer out of fear that this thing was something other than what it was. Of course, I plugged it in, and it was a, you know, pound of silicone, you know. And so but what it did do is it got me interested in the computer, and I actually started writing some little programs, and that sort of then led me to this other place, which was one of the first computer graphics companies, a place called Pacific Electric Pictures, which then led me on to digital productions, where we did Last Starfighter. So it was a love of aesthetics with a slight love of computers, and when I saw what the computer could do for art, it sort of sucked me in very quickly. And at that time, it was computer technology was mostly in commercial, you know, commercials and logos. And Last Starfighter was one of the first computer-generated movies. Of course, there was Tron at the time. And so there weren't a whole lot till about 10 years after that, till around 1990, when you know, the big films started coming out, like The Abyss and Terminator and all those things. And so that sort of propelled it forward. But until then, in those 10-year period, we were just pretty much experimenting with the whole thing. And, you know, one of my main mentors was Richard Edlund, who worked on the original Star Wars, and he, you know, developed a lot of the motion control equipment that was used on it. He shot a lot of those features. Indiana Jones was another one that he worked on. And so, you know, I always sort of looked at him as the guy to aspire to, and so we still have a very good relationship.